Hello, and welcome to another Agile IT Tech Talk. I'm your host, Sean Spicer, and today I am joined by Paul Zorio, our newest cloud engineer. Been around for a while, but moving up in the world. How you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to going over some conditional access and multi-factor authentication and some cool new features that Microsoft has released out. So ready to jump in.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. As a reminder, for those of you watching online, feel free to ask questions in the comment section below if you're watching on YouTube. If you are in the live session, go ahead and ask those questions in the questions panel, and we'll handle those once we stop recording. And let's get started.
All right. So what we're going to go over today is a high-level overview of conditional access and multi-factor authentication. And then we'll briefly touch on self-service password reset. And I'm sure you'll hear the references to CA, MFA, or SSPR. And those are just the acronyms for these items that we're talking about. And then some cool features that Microsoft has released. One, to make everyone's lives easier by combining the registration experiences for both of these items, as well as a convenient tool to use for auditing purposes on the CA/MFA side. But to get started, initially, what you want to consider when you're thinking about adding on conditional access and multi-factor authentication and introducing it to your environment, you want to do kind of a review of how your environment is currently set up and where and how people are accessing that information. So as you can see here, one of the first things you want to consider are, do you guys have service accounts that are have elevated permissions within the cloud side, within your cloud environment, your global admin, your SharePoint admins, because you'll want to exclude those from MFA because service accounts obviously can't respond to MFA. Where do you conduct business? Do you conduct business only in the US? And if that is the case, we can set up a safe countries list where you have the United States listed as a safe country and then all other countries listed as an unsafe country, which really helps to narrow in the attack vector that bad actors would have to be able to get into that account. Because if you're only enabling access via your safe countries list and someone tries to get in via Italy or Spain, they're automatically blocked on that. And then pairing that would be, what is the public IP of your corporate locations? This allows you to really narrow down and focus that geofencing policy that you want to set up so that you can require people to be on that corporate network and block people who are not. Or you can set some easier restrictions on your corporate network so they don't have to respond to MFA necessarily, as long as they're on that corporate network. And then, do you have people who constantly travel outside of the US or that safe countries list? With today's world and environment, we're all on the road, we're flying around the world, and we still need to be able to access our corporate data to be able to effectively do our job. So you also want to be able to secure that identity and that data. So if you're traveling outside of that safe country, you can set up a policy to still require MFA, and you leave them in that group for the duration of the trip. And then when they come back, you remove them and the policies go back to applying. And another big consideration here is your BYOD policy. Do you allow users to bring in their iPhones or their Androids or their iPads and access corporate data? Because that way you can set some parameters on these conditional access policies to require an app protection policy or a PIN to be applied to that application, so that you're ensuring that users who have their own devices are still protecting the corporate data. And the nice thing, too, is Microsoft segregates their personal profile from their work profile on these devices. So there will be no overlap between the two. Or do you have mobile device management systems? Are you using Intune for that? Do you have your corporate iPhones or your corporate Android devices? Because then you can require devices to be managed through Intune. You can require compliance policies to be met through these conditional access policies to really give you some granular control on who is accessing and how they're accessing and what they're using to access that data. Do different departments have different access needs? That's an important thing because obviously, your frontline workers aren't going to need to have the same availability as your C-level people will. C-level people most likely need to be able to work from home or work from the plane, where your frontline workers may really only need access during business hours while they're on the corporate network, and they shouldn't be accessing that corporate data when they get home. Moving right along here, do you have a separate admin account from your standard user accounts? And now I want to note here that it is best practices to have two separate accounts here. And the reason for that being is if you have global admin access on a standard user account and that person ends up getting phished, that person who now has the credentials to that account now has elevated permissions into your whole cloud environment. So it is important that you separate those out. You have an unlicensed global admin account and then a standard user account that doesn't have those elevated privileges. And given that those elevated privileges, and we're talking about MFA right now, do you have a break glass account? And it is just what it sounds like, is in case of emergency, you break glass. And that is an account that you would set up with global administrator privileges on it, and that you would exclude from any MFA policies that you have set. In case MFA services go down, in case there's an outage, you still have a way to get in and administer your tenant. And now a side note on that would be, obviously, you want to have an extremely complex password on that. You don't want to reference anything like admin in the username or anything of that nature. And then you want to be changing that passwords every 30, 60, 90 days, just because that is an elevated account that has access with no MFA enabled. But again, that is your fallback. And as long as it meets your compliance standards that you're following, that is a good thing to have in place. And then lastly, has licensing been acquired? Obviously, everything Microsoft requires some sort of license in order to leverage their features in the solutions. So you want to make sure that you have that in place. And that's included in the Azure P1 license, as well as your EMS and your Microsoft 365 suites. So moving along here, some discussion points that you want to have with your team internally is your consideration for your whitelisted locations. Are you going to whitelist your corporate offices, any satellite offices that you might have around the world, as well as those baseline conditional access policies. From the bare bones start, you want to have block access from foreign countries or your unsafe countries, and MFA for safe countries. That at least is putting in one layer of security onto your accounts beyond the traditional username and password, because we're past that point in the IT realm where username and password is enough to secure your environment. Those extra policies that you put in place will now at least really reduce that vector that people have to try to gain malicious access into your environment. And then some other possible considerations would be to allow login without MFA in those trusted locations. And like I was talking on the corporate office IP addresses, you can mark that as a trusted location, and you can set a parameter within the conditional access policy of, required to be hybrid Azure AD joined, or any other number of things that they don't have to use MFA. So it's not as cumbersome on the end user experience. Do you want to allow access to your non-domain joined devices, or do you require those devices to be hybrid Azure AD joined in order to access that company data? And then we always recommend blocking legacy exchange protocols as well as the native mail apps, just so that you can have full visibility into the applications that people are using to access your corporate data. If they're doing it through Outlook, you have full control of being able to remove that data from that person's device in case it's lost or stolen, or they move on to a different organization. And then with some elevated licensing, the P2 level of licensing, or the Microsoft EMS E5 versions, you can do risky user conditional access policies where if, Joe Smith is working from San Diego, and that's his, normal work hours are 8 to 5. And then, he leaves work at 5 p.m. and he tries to sign in from Florida at 6 p.m. That would be marked as impossible travel, and you can force a password reset or even block that access. So those are the kind of things that you want to kind of really decide on from a high level view to really narrow down what these conditional access policies will look like, and customize them to provide as much security as possible without inhibiting anyone's progress throughout their day. And now Microsoft does have an offering for MFA for Office 365. That is their free version that you can manage through the Microsoft 365 admin portal. What we're discussing today is the Azure MFA. And as you can see in this list here, Office 365 MFA gives you basically that. It gives you the ability to require MFA using your text message or a authenticator app, but that's it. Whereas Azure MFA allows you to use geofencing, allows you to set up fraud alerts, allows you to audit and review security reports, as well as take actions like block a required change password, for people who are marked as risky or may not be accessing their corporate data from their standard location. So you get a lot more flexibility and granularity into control using Azure MFA, as well as the flip side of being able to run your security audits and your reports, as well as investigate any malicious activity that you might see.
One thing I want to call out here, Paul, is that custom greetings during authentication phone calls. A lot of people think that customizing your portal login page is merely an aesthetic thing or that it's brand related. But by customizing your login screen, what you're actually doing is adding a layer of security based on your users' habits. Is that they log in every day with this, they see your logo, and if they do get a phishing attack and click through to a link that's trying to do some credential harvesting, and they notice that the login is different, then they'll have time to pause. And so the custom greetings during authentication phone calls prevents somebody from performing a man-in-the-middle attack where they perform a fake authentication phone call in order to get the authenticator codes. And so anytime you have that customization, what you're doing is you're adding what's called habitual security into that layer. And so I think that's a really useful feature that most people don't consider as being really security oriented and more being a brand. So it's definitely something you want to configure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for touching on that. And like you said, the importance here is, the more power you can give to the end user to help them protect their own account and their own data is, it makes everyone's lives easier, especially IT admins. So being able to give them that sense of familiarity and then, an obvious sign that they might not be logging into the right place or responding to the right challenge is, another step in the right direction. So very good point there, Sean. And speaking of making everyone's lives easier, anyone who's been in IT or who's been on a help desk, this is going to be a very big relief for you because Microsoft offers, obviously, multi-factor authentication and self-service password reset. Now, self-service password reset is just that. For any of your cloud-only accounts, you can enable SSPR for all of your users right away. For anyone who has a hybrid situation set up, you just need to make some adjustments on your Azure AD Connect service in order to allow password write back. But can you imagine taking the need to have to reset user passwords off of your plate or off of your help desk's plate? You're going to open up hours and hours a week for people to do other things and focus on, enhancing other products. So I think that would be something we'd all like to see in the rearview mirror. Now, what Microsoft has done prior to August 15th, 2020, you needed to manually enable this feature. And after any tenants that are created after that date, we'll have this feature enabled automatically. And this is the combined registration for SSPR and CA MFA. Now, without this enabled, the user goes into login for the first time. And if they've got both of these features enabled for their account, they'll go through a screen that says more information is required. They'll enter in their username, their phone number, enter in their email address, validate everything, and then hit OK. And then they get another screen that says more information is required. And that's for the MFA side of things. And obviously that can be confusing for users. I just entered this information in. Why am I being asked twice? So now Microsoft allows the combined registration where they register for both SSPR and CAMFA all in one sitting, which makes everyone's lives easier. That's less phone calls to you. That's less phone calls to the help desk, and empowers the user to be able to take these actions into their own hands. Now, what I want to do is go through and do a quick demo of how to enable that combined registration. It's literally just a switch in your Azure portal, as well as do an overview of the what if tool that is available to you for conditional access and multi-factor authentication.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul.
Sure. All right. And so here I am in the Azure portal. I'm logged in with a global admin account right now. This is your standard splash page for when you log into the Azure tenant for anyone who's familiar with it. And what we'll go through and do is I will show you how to go through and enable that combined registration we were just talking about. And then we'll jump over to the what if tool and I'll show you a couple scenarios of how you can use that to help plan or help audit sign-ins, or if someone says, hey, I'm unable to log in, you can also use that to determine if there's something affecting their account. For the combined registration, for anyone who has a tenant that was created prior to August 15th, 2020, which I'm assuming is probably 99% of you, once you get into your Azure AD side of things, you'll go down to user settings, and there's going to be a link here that says Manage User Feature Preview Settings. If you click on this, this is what will allow you to enable the combined registration experience. Now, you can, if you're just targeting certain accounts, obviously if you have your service accounts, you want to target just the groups that don't include those service accounts, you can do that, or you can do it for all users within the tenant. And for this purpose, we're going to go ahead and click on all here and then click on save. And that is it. That is one of the easiest features that you can enable, and it takes 3 clicks to be able to do. Highly recommend it, especially if you're using both SSPR and multi-factor authentication. So now we'll jump over to reviewing the what if tool for the conditional access policies. I will be using our perennial troublemaker in Megan Bowen to be our test here, our guinea pig here, to show you the policies that we have enabled and the different ways that this could affect her login, depending on how she's doing it, where she's doing it from, anything of that nature. One thing I do want to touch on earlier was we were talking about named locations. In this situation, we've got a corporate office IP range, which you can see is marked as trusted. And we have our safe countries, which is the United States. Unsafe countries is every single other country. And as a note here, only IP ranges can be marked as trusted. You obviously don't want to set an entire country as a trusted location and then set up a policy to allow all access to that trusted location. You want to be able to, you want to have your loopholes down as tight as possible and fill up any gaps. So this is the way to do that. Now, if we jump over to conditional access here, this, for anyone who's familiar, gives you your breakdown of the policies that you have. They'll show you the policies that you have on, enabled, or in report-only mode, which report-only mode is a feature that Microsoft released not too long ago, where before it was either on or off. Report-only mode allows you to go through and test the way these policies are going to interact with your user logins before enabling it. Otherwise, you weren't able to use this what if tool. But now that they are there, we'll go ahead and click on what if. So like I said, right now, Megan Bowen is in a group called Conditional Access Include, which is allowing her to access the corporate data anytime she's in the office or while she is at home, as long as she's pulling a US IP address. So obviously, the first thing you'll have to do here is select the user that you want to either audit or test on. We'll go ahead and select on Miss Megan Bowen here, any cloud apps, and you can specify this and modify this to be as specific as you possibly want, or you can leave it a little broader to just kind of see if there's going to be any other different reactions here. But for the sake of time and whatnot, we're going to leave this to any cloud apps, and then I'm going to list the randomized US IP address that I made here for the corporate offices. And then a thing to note here is if you put an IP address in here, you also have to put the associated country in there so that the what if tool is able to determine, one, if it's an IP address from that country, and then 2, what policies would apply to that. And for the rest of the settings here, I'm going to leave all else alone. And we're going to say Megan is just simply trying to log in using from the United States from the corporate office. So if we click on what if here, you will see, there we go, require MFA when in safe countries, trusted locations. And that's the result that we expected to see. And now you can see here the MFA for admins. If she had a global admin role applied to her, that would also take effect. And that MFA for admins is going to be regardless of where she is. She can be in the office or she could be at home. It's going to require MFA, but the one that will affect her for this situation is going to be require MFA when in safe countries or trusted locations. Now, let's say Megan has a 2-week vacation and she's jetting off to Costa Rica, and she wants to go see the world and be able to still do work while she's sitting on the beach and drinking her Mai Tai or her margarita. What you would do is you'd set up a policy to kind of pair with the block from unsafe countries. You'd set up a policy to require MFA when in unsafe countries, and you target a group like travel exceptions. So we'll go over here and we'll say Megan is in Costa Rica. This is the IP address that she's currently pulling, and we'll update this to show Costa Rica. And now we'll do what if. And now at the top here, you see require MFA for travel exceptions. This is going to allow her to access your corporate data while she's in an unsafe country, but still have that layer of security where she has to respond to a challenge in order to access that data. Now, let's say on the flip side of this, Megan went to Costa Rica, but she didn't give anyone in IT a heads up, so she's not in this travel exceptions group. What we'll do here is we'll go ahead and remove her from this group. And then I'm going to perform the same what if on her. So same IP address from Costa Rica. Now you see block access. That's because the policies that we have set up, Costa Rica is not listed as one of those safe countries, so she's not able to access that corporate data while she's pulling that IP address. And as a side note here as well, is if you do pull a what if and you see 3 policies listed, and all of the policies show that these would apply, it is the most restrictive policy that will apply across the board. So if you have a policy that says require MFA, you have a policy that says require hybrid Azure AD join, you have a policy that says block, the block policy will be the one that takes precedence over the other 2 policies there.
Cool.
Now, the last thing I want to go over here in terms of what if is, let's say, Megan has shifted roles and she should only be working on her day-to-day activities and using corporate data while she's in the office. And then when she goes home, she doesn't need to be working or anything like that. She needs to be focusing on family time or binge watching something on Netflix. What we'll do is we'll throw her into this group that we've created called hourly employees. And then I'm going to update this to this randomized IP address I pulled from the US. And this is going to be, let's say this is her home IP address. We'll go ahead and update the country to the United States. And if you perform the what if one more time here, so you see require multi-factor authentication when in safe countries. And then the next one down says block hourly employees outside corporate network. So that is the policy that would take precedence. Both of these are applying to her because she's in both groups. So she's prompted for MFA when she's in the office, but she's blocked from access when she's outside of the office. And this is just a really useful tool, like I said, to use just to test if all of your policies are in report only mode and you throw some people into the groups that are being applied to those policies and you want to see what those would look like if they signed in from a certain location or using a certain app or device. You can use that. I think this is a pretty underutilized tool, but this also helps with troubleshooting. If someone calls in and says, I got a message that says you can't get there from here, you run this what if tool and you can determine if there's a policy that is applying that is blocking that access. And so now what I would like to do is I have Sean take over here, and he's going to show you what that self-service password and multi-factor authentication registration experience looks like when it is a combined registration.
There we go. Can you see my screen, Paul?
Sure can. So
excellent.
As you can see, we'll go ahead and log in now that we've gotten SSPR and MFA enabled for this account. This will be the experience that all of your users go through with this combined registration experience. You'll get this pop-up that says more information is required. And as I was stating earlier, if you don't combine these 2 experiences, they'll get the same pop-up after they register for SSPR initially and then again for MFA. So combining this experience brings you to this setting where you can go select the app that you want to use. You can set up a different authentication method, whether that's SMS via text or a phone call, like Sean had mentioned about the custom phone call that you can set up as well. Once you go through this registration, you'll verify through the app by clicking yes, I approve the login. You'll enter a phone number. That's in case the MFA app isn't working for whatever reason. You have a second method to be able to get in. And then once you do that, it'll kick you over to registering for SSPR. And the nice thing about that is you've already entered your phone number in there. So the only other thing that you're going to ask for is an email address. And those are all for secondary options to be able to validate who you are when you're going to do a self-service password reset. And that is one thing to note, that when they do the self-service password reset, they do have to respond to some sort of MFA challenge, regardless of whether they've been set up for MFA or not. And that's to validate who they are. That's not just someone who's gained access to their account and goes and changes their password and then no one can access their account anymore. You still have to validate who you are either way. But the summation of all of this is both of these experiences combined makes it much more streamlined for you and much more easier for the end user to understand what's going on, and less questions are asked, and there's a lot less overhead for management and configuration.
Great. And here on my end, I've got the Authenticator app on my phone. I'm scanning the QR code. It says activating, please wait. Account added successfully. I go ahead and click next. Let's try it out. I just got a pop-up on my phone that says approve sign-in, has Megan's credentials here. I'm going to approve here. It automatically comes through in less than a second. Hit next. Now we do need to have a secondary setup just in case I'm on a new phone that doesn't have the authentication app. I will redact this for YouTube viewers. Don't want y'all calling me. Now I'm going to get a text message. There we go. Oops. Phone is registered. Great job. Click done.
So go ahead and click on next there. And there you have it. So that's the combined registration experience. Because you have an app set up and your phone set up, you're all set. You can also, like I said, enable email notifications for recovery. But now this is the combined experience. You don't have to go through that process twice, and you're ready to go to change your own password and have your account protected by MFA.
Great. And, in most demos, we would go ahead and have Megan do something stupid. Insecure. In order to get her account blocked, we'll go ahead and skip that for this one. But we're going to go ahead and click on Megan. Change my password. I get it right here. Since I've got that still in my paste bin, we're going to go ahead and create a new one using those strong randoms and submit. My good friend, the little blue circle. And we change. We need to go ahead and put that in again. Approve sign-in request. It's challenging me for MFA since credentials have changed. I'll just jump back into the Authenticator app. Approve. And there we go.
Password changed.
Ready to go. I didn't have to talk to IT. Didn't have to waste Paul's time. I forgot my password.
You can reset it yourself now. Empower the people.
Excellent. And I've got to call out on this one because I know that he's going to watch this on YouTube. One of my buddies works for an MSP in another state. And he called me up after work about a month ago. And he's like, hey, man, my company, we're going to go ahead and we're going to enable this self-service password reset. Do you think that's a good idea if we do that for all of our clients? And I'm like, oh my God, you haven't already? He's like, no. I'm like, so you're really taking calls from your customers to reset passwords? He's like, yeah, we hired a guy just for that. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry for your life. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I really enjoyed seeing that what if tool. I like that because prior to that, if you did want to actually test these policies, you'd have to do some like crazy VPN stuff to make it look like you were logging in from outside of the country. So that makes it really simple.
Sure. And then one side note, too, for that what if tool is if these policies are in report only mode, if you go to a user's account through Azure AD and you click on their sign-ins, you can actually use the report only tab to see what policies would have applied based on the exact parameters of those sign-ins. So that's another useful tool that you can use as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us once again. Tech Talks are a service for our MSP and CSP clients here at Agile IT. If you are part of that group, you get to ask questions in a NDA protected session after these presentations and demos. If you are watching on YouTube, though, we love to help. Please feel free to ask questions below. Give us a like and follow, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks all.